Welcome to the Broncos podcast with Troy Renck. I am your host, Troy Renck from the Denver Post. Hope you're already off to a great start to your weekend. It is Friday. We're previewing a little Broncos Panthers. Maybe just a slice of Nuggets talk just to express my disappointment what I saw. I know Big A behind the screen saw it. It was a disappointing opening for the Nuggets, but a lot of optimism surrounding your Broncos country. 4-3. 10-point favorite in some books against the Panthers. I can't remember the last time the Broncos would have been a 10-point favorite. My guess, without looking, is that it was in the 2015 season or 14 season with Peyton Manning. But the Broncos have a chance to get at virtually the halfway point to 5-3. Can this team reach the playoffs as is? I don't think so. I think they need to add a weapon for Bo Nix. The defense will travel, folks, and I talked to Chris Harris and Wade Phillips, my columns up about this, on the similar traits between the current defense and the all-time great 2015 defense. Too early to compare them, but definitely some similar traits, similar style coaching, because Wade Phillips was a mentor of Vance, and we'll hear part of my interview with Wade Phillips from yesterday from his home in Houston, and look at the idea that Sean Payton, man, this guy loves October more than pumpkins and Halloween. He does damage. So good time to be a Broncos fan. Huge favorite this week against the Panthers. Bo Nix has a chance to grow and develop, get a little more traction, but they can't believe that they're steady yet. They can't. You got to be able to handle prosperity, and they got to be open-minded to adding another piece. If this team is going to get to what is likely needed, 10 wins, they might be able to sneak in at 9. But they got to be open to adding another piece and finishing off October strong, which is the history of Sean Payton. We're going to get to all of that after the break. Have you been injured in a car wreck or hurt at work? What are you waiting for? Give my friends at Hoggett Injury Law a call. Their motto, and tell them I told you this, it's personal. It's personal because I know Darby Hoggett. I know the kind of man he is. I've known him for more than a decade. We traveled the country watching our boys play baseball. I coached his son in hoops. Darby's a great man. I became his good friend. Many of his clients become his good friend. You don't even have to pay Darby up front. If your case goes as planned, Darby will be the one writing checks to you. So again, you've been hurt in a car wreck? You've been hurt in work? Call Darby's team. It's 1-833-HOGGATT. That's 1-833-HOGGET, or visit the website at hoggettlaw.com. Basketball fans, it's that time of year again. The NBA is back. From opening tip-off to buzzer beaters, BetOnline has you covered with the best odds, biggest promotions, and live in-game betting on all your favorite teams, including the Nuggets. This season, every game matters. BetOnline has every stat, matchup breakdown, and live odds to bet on during the game. And it's not just the NBA. BetOnline has odds on everything from football, MLB playoffs, NHL, to even political props. Head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline. The game starts here. Welcome back to the Broncos pod. I hope you're having a wonderful start to your weekend. The weather is starting to turn a little fallish, in the 50s some days, 60s, but this is what Colorado should be. We shouldn't be in the 80s as we approach November. We want to see the leaves changing, get up to the mountains. It's running out a little bit of time, but even around the city, up north here in Longmont, but Wash Park and those places, it is a beautiful time of year to live in Colorado, and it is feeling like a great time of year because the Broncos are competitive and playing well. And we all love, what the Avs and Nuggets have done in recent seasons, certainly not the Rockies, but the Avs and Nuggets. But in so many ways in the fall, the heartbeat and the emotions of the city get attached to how the Broncos are doing. And the Broncos folks are competitive. They're 4-3, and they have a chance to go to 5-3, a realistic chance to go to 5-3. But how do they do that? Well, Bo Nix has got to play better. What we've seen from Bo Nix is very encouraging. This guy's a legitimate dual threat quarterback in the same way that Lamar Jackson is or Jaden Daniels is. He's not them. You're talking about a guy who's on pace for right at 615 yards rushing for a season. That's just shy of Tim Tebow's record in 2012. He's on pace for double-figure touchdowns. When I asked Bo about it this week, Does it bother you, or do you see it as a compliment when people call you a dual threat quarterback? Because he's been that since he's basically been a ninth grader in high school. He said, "No, it doesn't bother me as long as they know I can and say I can still throw. You can't be known just as a running quarterback in the NFL, but running is part of his game, and the RPO is part of his game. And what could grow him in the game? Well, obviously he's got to be better from the pocket. We've talked about that with his footwork. But there's one specific area they could address that would help him, and that's adding a pass catching tight end. With all due respect to the current group, the leader in receptions this year is Lucas Kroll at 6. Greg Dulcich, who led the team in receiving for a tight end in 2022, is now a healthy scratch every week. Adam Troutman is he's a nice complementary player, but he's a little slow in the passing game. Nate Atkins is a blocking back. He's a blocker. That's just where it stands. Kroll has a chance to develop. I'm just saying this year, I think he's a little raw to be trusted. He might be ready next year, but for this season, when I watch him, there's just enough mistakes in his game, and part of it's inexperience. I'm not saying it's not, but they can't afford those mistakes when they get into games against better teams, and that's coming up against Baltimore, against Kansas City twice, against Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, where the margin for error is much thinner than it is against the Saints and than it is against a team like the Panthers this Sunday. But there's one guy. When you look at the Broncos stats, and folks, this is crazy, and I wrote about this week at the Denver Post. Get Bo off the tightrope, and you need to add him a tight end in the passing game. And I asked Sean Payton about it, and he said, yeah, he agrees. They need more production because that person is open in the triangle of the passing game inside a lot of times because they can sit in a zone defense. They're a mismatch in man up the seam. It opens up the middle of the field, and he admitted that. But he said, hey, if Lucas Kroll catches that one ball that Bo overthrew him and it dropped in front of Franklin. Well, Bo did say this week, hey, he wasn't looking at Franklin. He was throwing to Kroll, and it was a bad pass. But, it basically, in my investigation of it, Kroll ran short on the route, and Bo expected him to be like 3 yards deeper. It was still a bad pass, not defending the pass, but Kroll messed up, and this is my point. But Peyton's like, hey, if we complete that pass, if we make that one play, we're not talking about that. And I say, you mean make one trade? Because then we're not talking about it. If you go get David Njoku from the Cleveland Browns, and I get it, the history of the Broncos isn't to make big moves to get a tight end, but they did it once in 2015 with Vernon Davis, and I talked to Vernon this past summer about it. It didn't go exactly how he wanted over the final half of the season. 20 catches, 201 yards. He made a huge block in the Super Bowl that sprung C.J. Anderson. But in his defense, he did win a ring. He did contribute. It wasn't the way they anticipated when they got him. But when they got him, Peyton Manning got hurt. They played like 7 quarters together. That crushed him. And with all due respect to Brock Osweiler, he's not Peyton Manning. And Brock's just, he's in survival mode trying to win games, not trying to integrate a new piece into the offense. But it did, in a way it worked because you got a contributor. It still created a threat on the field. The Broncos right now, their tight end room, and thanks to Parker Gabriel for sending this stat from Sumner Sports, is they're getting 12% of the targets, the tight end room. There's 20 tight ends this season that have more targets than that. I mean, obviously the Raiders with Brock Bowers leading that group along with the Ravens with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. But the Ravens are one I want you to think about when you see the RPO with Lamar. He puts the ball in the belly, and then the ball comes straight up, and there's that tight end 7 yards down, just sitting wide open. And tight ends can be covered, and they're still open. They can be open when they're covered because they're bigger. They're mismatched against the linebacker, in some cases even a corner in there in a zone. And it's 2nd and 3 now. And that's my point with this, is just you can't sleep on the idea of what it would mean to add a tight end. And Njoku, you say, Troy, they can't do it. You probably hear talk on other radio stations of there's no salary cap room. There is for him. Njoku reworked his deal before the season, so his base salary this year is $1.2 million. If you were to acquire him next week with 9 games remaining, you'd be on the hook for roughly $670,000. You could make that work by cutting one of your own tight ends. Maybe you trade Dulcich in the deal. Again, and the reason I like this is Njoku's 28. He's under contract for next year at $14.25 million. You'd want to, if you love the guy, right when you acquire him, you renegotiate and get him an extension right then. Or you have the understanding that we're going to redo your deal for the next couple of years. He's not going to play the 2025 season at $14.25 million. But for this year, if it costs you a fourth, would that prevent you from doing it? And again, it's not a rental. It should not be viewed as a rental. Njoku could be someone you would have for 3 years, the remainder of this season, 2025 and 2026. Because I'm telling you, if you look at the Broncos stats from the tight end position, dreadful the last 3 years, worse than the NFL. Starting with Hackett's year in 22, but last year with Peyton, right around 39 catches. This year they're on pace for like 330 yards and no touchdowns and 10 first downs. They've got to get more from the tight end position in the passing game. It's very simple when you look at the numbers. I mean, Julius Thomas had 24 touchdowns over back-to-back seasons in 2013 and 14. He covered that. The Broncos tight ends since then have 44 touchdowns over the last decade. I mean, Noah Fant looks like the salad days when you look at what's going on now. It's just they're not getting any production from the tight end. And it's where it's not happening in the middle of the field. And again, Sean Payton can scheme it up, and they might say, hey, we're going to roll the dice here and double down on Lucas Kroll. I know they love his potential. It's not the athleticism with Kroll. It's that he makes mistakes here and there, whether it's a block, a hold, a missed route, just a little bit off because of his inexperience. I don't know that you can trust him to play the way you want him to now that you're in it. If this was a complete rebuilding season and they were going to win 5 games, you roll Kroll out there and you figure out what you got. But Sean Payton's never viewed it that way. I have, and I've picked 6 wins. They got a real shot at 9 right now as we sit here today, the way the schedule's opened up. I think if you believe that, and Sean Payton has never had any posture other than I believe in this team, then you have to go out and get a tight end. And David Njoku makes the most sense. Austin Hooper would be available likely, but you've got to get a guy with experience that can catch the football, that gives Bo Nix an outlet, a safety valve in the passing game. But you're saying, hey, maybe they just win with defense. And they could. And that's the next topic. And I want to introduce in here in a few minutes, Wade Phillips. But this defense, folks, is putting up insane numbers. And I'm not comparing them to the 2015 defense. That, for me, is a top 10 all-time great defense. As Wade Phillips told me in our interview yesterday, they finished first in like 11 categories at the end of the season. They went 7-1 against potential Hall of Fame quarterbacks, which was Tom Brady twice. And I know some people say Phillip Rivers is not a Hall of Famer. He's got a shot. They beat Phillip Rivers twice, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford. You're talking about a who's who of quarterbacks that they beat that year. And they beat Roethlisberger. They split with him. But in the playoffs, remember, they went Roethlisberger, Brady, and Cam Newton. And Cam Newton was the reigning, going to win the MVP on a team that was averaging 40 points in the playoffs. So if you want to be all-time great, you got to beat great quarterbacks. And that is missing from the Broncos' current resume. Their best win would be against Baker Mayfield, who's having a nice year, and a washed Aaron Rodgers. I mean, Rodgers, I don't want to hear it about Rodgers. He's been terrible this year. So beating him, in hindsight, in 5-10 years from now, will look nice on the resume. Those of us watching this year, Rodgers stinks this year. Metrically, statistically, any number you want to use, he's been bad. But they have a chance, not this week, because Bryce Young's 0-9 on the road, folks. I expect them. The reason I did this piece this week is I expect the Broncos to have 6 or 7 sacks, to absolutely dominate the Panthers, where we look up and go, okay, now after 8 games, this Broncos defense is in a really great position statistically. But they're going to have to do it against good quarterbacks. And Chris Harris, I talked to him as well. He told me that. Like, hey, I love what they're doing. Aggressive, getting after it. He played for Vance Joseph here. Never. He's like, at some point, you got to make statements against good quarterbacks. And they have that coming up with Lamar Jackson, Mahomes twice, Joe Burrow, even Joe Flacco. I mean, Flacco's a little bit off, beaten path given the age. But you're going to have a chance then to do it. But what are some of the things we like between these two defenses? Well, the 2015 defense, where were they after 7 games? Broncos were 7-0. Broncos defense ranked first in fewest yards allowed, first in fewest yards per play, first in points allowed at 16, fourth in rushing yards allowed at 89.3, and first in passing yards allowed at 171. And they had 29 sacks. Where do the current Broncos compare to that? It's not apples to apples, but it's just interesting to where they're at. You look at the Broncos defense, net yards per game, they're third, about 20 yards more than that group added. 439, first and fewest yards allowed per play. Remember, the 15 team was 4.1. Rushing is 111.7. The Broncos ranked 10th. But this time last year, they were allowing 167 yards per game on the ground. So that's where the improvement, and I predicted that most with the addition of Malcolm Roach and John Franklin Myers. Net passing, 170, that's fifth. And you look at sacks, the Broncos at 28, that's one fewer than the 15 team through 7 games. That ranks second. And like that team, they're really good in red zone touchdown percentage, and they get really good inside the 10, inside the 20. And so, again, it's not apples to apples. That Broncos team in 15 had 17 takeaways through this many games, and the Broncos, when you look at their takeaways right now, they're at 10. So that's where there's a huge difference. And again, it's not apples to apples, folks. We're not doing goodwill hunting. How about them apples? Because that team in 15 had 3 potential Hall of Famers. DeMarcus Ware is in the Hall of Fame. You've got Von Miller, who will be in the Hall of Fame. And you also have Aqib Talib, who's got a case. Then you had, sideline to sideline linebackers with Brent Marshall and Danny Trevathan, and the no-fly zone secondary, which has set the standard for all future secondaries with Chris Harris, Aqib Talib, TJ Ward, and Darian Stewart. The Broncos' current group has 1 first-rounder in Pat Surtain, and they got a guy who should be all-pro at the end of the year in Zach Allen. They got a lot of guys who've been told they weren't good enough, who've been overlooked, and they're playing with a similar style, hustling to the ball, the camaraderie, the chemistry, caring for the guy next to you. So I had a chance to talk to Wade Phillips about that. And the reason I wanted to do this it's not comparison, that's not the right word, is how they don't have the same stats but similar traits. Wade Phillips was a mentor to Vance Joseph. Part of how Vance Joseph broke in and learning to coach defense was through Wade Phillips. Wade still watches all the games. So that's the other connection here. It's this Broncos defense has a chance to be one of the best in franchise history at its current pace. Not all-time great, that's 15. But what are some of the traits? And that's why I wanted to talk to Wade. So here's my interview, part of my interview with Wade Phillips on what he sees when he watches the current group in 2024 with Vance Joseph, and kind of what he remembers about his group that absolutely wrote a diary havoc and led the Broncos to the Super Bowl 50 title. Let's hear from Coach Wade.
So I know you're at least – the reason I wanted to talk to you for 2 reasons. One, you're 15 defense, but also I know you follow the Broncos because of Vance. Sure. And so that's my initial question is, what do you see – because I'm not comparing them to your 15 defense. It's not about stats. It's about traits, like some of the things I see that they do. But what do you see when you watch Vance's defense that you like through the eyes of a defensive coordinator?
I think I like the way they play, obviously. Their aggressive defense. It's not necessarily blitzing. It's just they're aggressive. Their pass rush, their run defense, swarming to the ball. Their effort on defense is really good, and I enjoy seeing that.
I think you might have told me this, but coaches have told me, you can tell how much players buy into a coordinator by how close how many guys are to the ball on defense. Do you agree with that? Is that part of, the buy-in?
Yeah, I do. It's guys making plays or being around the ball that you don't normally see. It's a 1-2 thing that's hard to teach, and it's hard to get a group to do that. And ones that have pride, and ones that know what they're doing, ones that are aggressive, that's what you see.
I know you would love it about Vance. So last year when it went off the rails against Miami, the 70 points, he didn't point any fingers. He had every reason to blame some guys because there was 2 or 3 guys that frankly quit in that game. A couple of them got cut not long after. But he said, hey, it's on me, guys. We're close. We're going to get better. And players love that he had their back. Have you known that about Vance as a coach? I covered him way back when he was a player at CU. That's how old I am now. But did you see those traits in him and why players would kind of be loyal or buy into him?
Yeah, well, been our philosophy for a long time. I said it almost before every game I've ever coached was, hey, mistakes are mine. You go out and play. We'll correct the mistakes, but you go out and play. So, and I think Vance has adopted that philosophy also, and I mean it. It's you have to get them to play as hard as they can play, and not worry about making mistakes. And I think he's certainly they reflect that also.
Yeah, because as a coach, if you have their back, I know from coaching youth sports for 15 years that when they know you care about them, they seem to care a lot more and invest and take ownership when they know the coach has his back or coach has their back.
That's for sure.
When you think back to your team, I got your stats from where you guys were at 7 games in that season in 15. And I lived it. I covered you, but it's just unbelievable how dominant that defense was. When you're first in yards, least yards allowed, first in fewest yards per play, first in points per game, fourth in rushing, first in passing. You had at that point 29 sacks in 7 games. What do you remember about that defense? Obviously you had some great talent, but it was beyond the talent.
Yeah, I don't think people realized it at the time. I did, but. We led the league in like 11 categories at the end of the year. And then we play in the playoffs and third downs. I don't know what the percentage was, but it was less than 25% against Roethlisberger, Brady, and Cam Newton. So we had it all, and and offense. We played with Osweiler for 7 games, and Manning led the league in interceptions and 9 games. So, our offense was 23rd, but they were good. We played off our offense. Our offense played off of us, and we had a great team. But that group was, I don't think people realized at the time how great they were on defense. And at the end of the season, I'm talking about, until we got to the playoffs, and then it became really obvious.
Yeah, that show you put on against the Patriots, I think that might be a record or something, right, for hits on a quarterback in a playoff game, or maybe all time. But, did you know kind of going into that game, that scheme, you were going to be able to get after him?
No, you never know against Tom Brady.
Right.
I played him several times before, and we had good games against him, but he ended up winning, those kind of things. So, but I knew we were good, I knew we were really good, and we had a chance to win. And they're playing home help too, obviously.
Yeah, and like you said, I was talking to Chris Harris earlier today and saying, this defense is playing great. And he's like, slow down making comparisons because they haven't played any great quarterbacks. And he's right. They played Baker Mayfield, who's had a good year, and that was on the road. That was probably their best game, and Geno Smith. But other than that, they've caught some breaks. That's not their fault. But if you're going to be a great defense, because you guys are not just a great Broncos defense. For me, you're an all-time great defense. You got to beat great quarterbacks at some point, don't you?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, it's you can hit certain times that you don't play against the best players and those kinds of things. But sooner or later, you're gonna have to play against some great offensive teams and make a difference. And that's what was great about that defense is it didn't matter who we played.
Well, that's just a sampling of Wade Phillips, and thanks for joining me here at the Broncos podcast with Troy Renck. I'm Troy Renck, columnist for the Denver Post, and Wade talked for another 10 minutes or so about some other stuff. Again, he is a huge fan of Vance Joseph. He was a member of Vance. He also had coached with Greg Minuski, the Broncos inside linebacker coach. So he's watching every Broncos game, folks, and he's tuned in, he's dialed in, and the way Vance Joseph coaches, there are a lot of similarities to Wade Phillips in terms of putting players in position to succeed, and the mistakes are the coaches, and he will correct the mistakes. And the reason you do that is so players operate with freedom and they play fast. You have to trust that the players are going to buy in. They have to study. They have to buy into the scheme. But when you do that, and the coach then is saying, hey, if you make mistakes, it's on me. Then I should have coached you better. And sometimes it isn't. But players appreciate that, a coach that has their back. And players love Wade Phillips. Absolutely love Wade Phillips. From Von Miller to DeMarcus. I mean, DeMarcus might have been his biggest fan from his days in Dallas and then following him to Denver. But that 2015, folks, that group deserves its flowers. And they should always be mentioned as an all-time top 10 defense because, again, they went 7-1 against future Hall of Fame quarterbacks, a group that included Tom Brady, Phillip Rivers, Aaron Rodgers in his prime, not the version we see now, Ben Roethlisberger, Matthew Stafford. 7-1 against that group. Their one loss was to Roethlisberger late in regular season, 34-27 at Pittsburgh, a game they were up like 27-12 at halftime and got shut out in the second half. But that team, and then what they did to Tom Brady in the AFC Championship game in terms of the hits they put on him, just the stats are just absolutely eye-opening. So they deserve their flowers. But this Broncos defense has a chance to go down as a top 10 defense in franchise history with the numbers they are putting up. And if they continue to play complementary football, because their special teams have been fantastic, if they continue to get complementary football and improvement from the offense, and this team starts leading, and I think you'll see that this week. Again, that's part of the reason I wrote about it in the Denver Post is because you could look up on Monday and see the Broncos with 7 or 8 sacks. Now they're on a pace for 60 sacks and 13 points allowed. All these metrics after the halfway point are going to look very favorable to them and compare against really any Broncos defense through a half season. The challenge then becomes to make that statement and beat good quarterbacks. Can you split with Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, or just split the 2 games with the Chiefs? Can you find a way to go on the road and beat a Joe Burrow? I mean, that's the challenge that lies ahead. You're going to catch a break in the games you play against the Raiders, the Browns, and the Colts with the Flacco and Jameis Winston and Gardner Minshew again. Those games, then you dominate. But you're going to have to, against good teams, make a statement if you want to be remembered historically, especially if the season doesn't result in a playoff berth. It's very difficult to remember as a great in anything if you don't have a winning record. You can, but it's difficult. But this team has a chance to have a winning record for the first time since 2016. This team has that chance to have a playoff berth, to post a playoff berth. And that leads me to my last point here. And again, thanks for joining me, Broncos Country. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the support here on YouTube and both on the audio on wherever you get your pod, on Spotify or Apple, wherever you get it. You guys have been great. The reason they have a chance, they can finish October strong, folks. Sean Payton likes October more than pumpkins. I mean, this guy absolutely dominates in October. And you don't believe so? How about this? Sean Payton's record in October, all time, 49-17. Wait, what? And you can't even count the Jets game this year because that was a September game. But they're 2-1 in October this year with a very realistic chance as a 10-point favorite to go to 3-1. Sean Payton, and it's not a coincidence because he talks about running the race, getting ahead, and they started respectfully. They 0-2, but they were able to rebound right away. Those 3 straight road wins look huge right now, as we know. But October is a sign of, you look at Bill Belichick, you look at Andy Reid's, that's usually when some of the best coached teams make their move. And Peyton, whether you like him or not here in Denver, I mean, he's historically a great coach. He's got an argument for the Hall of Fame. It's going to be tough. Only has 1 Super Bowl win. And the Bounty Gate thing's not going to help, obviously. But if he gets back to a Super Bowl, even without winning it, as an NFC, going from the NFC to AFC, I mean, that's a strong argument. Andy Reid's putting himself in the conversation as greatest coach of all time here. He keeps going along. I mean, with all due respect to Belichick, Reid's not far behind him now. Peyton, to get into the Canton, would have to get to the Super Bowl. I don't think he'd have to win it. He'd have to get to it. But October is when you look at it, is a chance for a better coach team to really gain traction. And I do think it speaks to how Sean Payton runs his program, the culture, the discipline, the accountability, the way the staff pays attention to details. This is when good, well-coached teams make their move. And you got to keep it up. Part of it, when you coach this way, you're hard on players and you're demanding, sometimes you lose them at the end of the year. That's why finding the right players is so important, the right fit, guys who can be coached this way. I thought at the end of the year last year, they ran out of gas. You got some players, it didn't fit. They're not used to being pushed. The demanding style, when they absolutely had to have a win last year against the Patriots, they fizzled. This team's makeup feels different. The defense has such an edge about them and accountability to one another. It feels different. And the offense, it just has to keep getting better, specifically in the passing game. They're 29th in the passing game. They're not going to reach the playoffs at 29th. They need to be around 20 at the end of the year. And it needs to involve a tight end, as I mentioned. Please consider. And Sean Payton told me when I asked him that they're always thinking about trades, so they're open to it. He talks to George Payton. He compared it to homecoming. Your homecoming's a couple of weeks out, and you're putting feelers out to who might want to go to the dance with you. Well, text David Njoku, text the Broncos. You absolutely need a tight end. Maybe you trade one of your quarterbacks and pick up a piece that way. But you've got to think, not Knicks, obviously, but you trade Zach Wilson and or Jared Stidham. They've got to add to the offense, whether it's receiver, which I would prefer would have been T. Higgins. He's not going to be available. And I don't like Cooper Kupp as a fit because of the age and injury history. I just don't like it. I love the player. I do. I don't like it for the Broncos because it just screams rental at a high price. And he's older than Cortland Sutton. That's not the direction you need to go. That's why you moved on from Tim Patrick. Njoku is 28. He makes a lot of sense. So, folks, hope you enjoy. Big weekend for the Broncos, where as a Broncos fan, it feels like old times. You can go to the game, watch your team get ahead early, get after it defensively. I have the Broncos winning like 34-13. This should be an impressive route. I just need to see growth offensively, and then hopefully waking up on Monday morning, Tuesday morning to the Broncos acquiring a tight end or an offensive weapon. And that would give them even more momentum going to the second half of the season against those first two games against at Ravens, at Chiefs. Folks, thank you so much. This pod would not be made possible without my great friends at Mile High Sports. Big A behind the screen. He was up late doing Nuggets last night, and that's my quick Nuggets take. They need some three-point shooters. Julian Strouthard looked terrible. They were 1 for 16 from the bench, folks, for threes. I think it ended up 7 for 39 from three-point range. I mean, that's why, hey, listen, I like Russell Westbrook. The edge and attitude, he can't shoot. They need three-point shooters. And if Jamal Murray doesn't get to a point where he's ascending again in his career, they're in trouble. They're in trouble. I'm not saying that after one game. I'm saying the way the roster is constructed, where's the scoring coming from in the second bench? Can you keep staggering Jamal Murray or put him at a shooting guard and have Russell Westbrook be the point in that second unit? Russell Westbrook shooting 6 threes is not ideal, folks. He's a high-volume, low-accuracy three-point shooter. You need Strouthard to get going at some point in the next month or two, and you got to get Jamal Murray where he can average 22, 23 points a game and do it consistently. And and Jokic did not play well last night defensively. The best big man on the court was Chet Holmgren. So it's one game, but the bench remains an issue, folks. The bench and lack of three-point shooting are something we got to keep an eye on. But anyway, Big A has all that. You can go back and see his pod. He does a great job with CU. He does a great job with the Nuggets. He's on Rockies. The guy's on everything. He's amazing. So he and Nate Lundy at Mile High Sports, I could not do this without them. And my guy, Darby Hoggett at Hoggett Injury Law, and, of course, our new sponsor, Bet Online. They make this all possible. Broncos country, I do this pod for you. Happiness, that begins with me. Go out there and have a great day.